Millionaire CEO of a restaurant consoled a girl who lost her necklace. When he saw it was the same as his, he froze. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. James Montgomery had built his entire life on control. As CEO of Montgomery Industries, he was accustomed to anticipating every outcome and never letting emotions interfere with logic. Tonight, however, he had stepped away from the structured world of corporate meetings for a quiet dinner at Angelo's, a small restaurant on the outskirts of the city. The establishment was warm and welcoming, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and bustling families, so different from the upscale restaurants where investors vied for his attention. Here, no one recognized the billionaire who graced magazine covers. James was about to take his first sip of wine when a sound cut through the restaurant's gentle murmur, a child's soft, trembling sob. He glanced up, his gaze landing on a small figure near the counter. A little girl with dark curls sat on the floor, tiny shoulders shaking as she wiped tears away with clenched fists. Something in his chest tightened unexpectedly. James wasn't the type to get involved in strangers' problems, especially children's. Yet he found himself standing, crossing the room in measured strides. "Hey," he said, crouching down to her level. "Are you okay?" The little girl looked up, her bright blue eyes swimming with tears. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered, "and I lost my special necklace." "What's your name?" James asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Audrey," she replied, studying him with surprising composure despite her tears. "I'm James. Let's find your mom, okay?" He offered his hand, surprised when she took it without hesitation. As they walked through the restaurant, Audrey clutched something in her other hand. "Is that your necklace?" James asked. She nodded, opening her palm to reveal a silver pendant, a small compass with intricate engravings around its edge. James froze mid-step. The world seemed to narrow to that small silver object, identical to the one he'd worn throughout his childhood, a Montgomery family heirloom his mother had given him. He'd never seen another like it. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "My mommy gave it to me." "It was my daddy's," Audrey said simply. Before James could process this, a frantic voice called out, "Audrey!" A woman rushed toward them, relief washing over her features. "Thank God," she breathed, kneeling to embrace her daughter. When she looked up to thank the stranger who'd helped, her expression changed instantly. The color drained from her face. "James," she whispered. He recognized her immediately, Lauren Clark. They had shared a brief but intense relationship 4 years ago, before she suddenly disappeared from his life. James stared at Audrey, then back at Lauren, his mind racing through calculations he didn't want to make. Audrey's age, the familiar blue eyes, the necklace he'd given Lauren before she vanished. "Is she mine?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Lauren's silence was answer enough. The restaurant seemed to fall silent around them, though James knew it was just the roaring, in his ears drowning everything else out. Lauren stood before him, her hand protectively on Audrey's shoulder, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "She's yours." The confirmation hit James like a physical blow. 4 years. He'd missed 4 years of his daughter's life without even knowing she existed. "Mommy, do you know him?" Audrey asked, looking between them with innocent curiosity. Lauren knelt down to Audrey's level. "Sweetie, why don't you go sit at our table for a minute? I need to talk to Mr. Montgomery." "Okay," Audrey agreed, but before turning away, she looked up at James with a smile. "Thank you for helping me find Mommy." James couldn't speak, could only nod as he watched her skip away, completely unaware of how profoundly her existence had just altered his world. Once Audrey was settled, Lauren turned back to him, arms crossed, defensively. "I know you have questions." "Questions?" James's voice was dangerously quiet. "You kept my child from me for 4 years, Lauren. Questions doesn't begin to cover it." A waitress approached but quickly retreated at the tension radiating between them. James guided Lauren to a quiet corner where they could speak privately, while still keeping Audrey in sight. "Why?" he demanded. Lauren's composure cracked slightly. "I tried to tell you, James. When I found out I was pregnant, I came to your office." "I never saw you." "No," she agreed. "Because I met your Uncle Richard instead. He told me you were in the middle of the biggest acquisition of your career, that you were working 20-hour days, traveling constantly." James's jaw tightened at the mention of his uncle, his father's brother who had helped build Montgomery Industries. "He said telling you about a pregnancy from a brief relationship would destroy everything you'd worked for." Lauren's voice grew quieter. "He convinced me it would be better for everyone if I just disappeared." "He had no right," James said, anger coiling inside him. "And neither did you." "I know that now," Lauren admitted. "But I was 24, scared, and your uncle was very persuasive." James's mind raced through the implications. His uncle had deliberately kept his child from him, had made this decision for him, and Lauren had let him. "Did he pay you?" The question was harsh, but he needed to know. Lauren's eyes flashed with anger. "No, I never took a penny from your family." James looked over at Audrey, who was happily drawing on a paper placemat, oblivious to the life-altering conversation happening across the room. His daughter. The word felt foreign in his mind. "Does she know anything about me?" he asked, his voice softer now. Lauren shook her head. "She knows her daddy couldn't be with us, but that's all. I never told her your name." The reality of the situation crashed over James in waves. He was a father, had been for 4 years without knowing it. "I want to be in her life," he said firmly. It wasn't a request. Lauren studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I wouldn't keep her from you now. That's not why I stayed away." James looked back at Audrey, who caught his gaze and waved enthusiastically. Without thinking, he waved back. "I'm not walking away from her, Lauren," he said, turning back to the woman who had once meant something to him, who now was forever tied to him through their daughter. "Not now. Not ever." 3 days after the restaurant encounter, James found himself standing at the entrance to Westside Park, shifting his weight as he checked his watch for the 5th time. He'd arrived 20 minutes early, unable to concentrate on anything else all morning. A children's book was tucked under his arm, The Brave Little Explorer, carefully selected after an hour at the bookstore. What did 4-year-old girls like to read? He had no idea, but the story about a child discovering hidden treasures seemed appropriate. When he spotted Lauren and Audrey walking along the path, his chest tightened. Audrey bounced with each step, chattering animatedly while Lauren listened with the practiced patience of a mother. They made a beautiful picture, one he should have been part of for years. Audrey spotted him first, her face lighting up with recognition. "It's the nice man from the restaurant," she exclaimed, breaking into a run before Lauren could stop her. She skidded to a halt in front of him, tilting her head up with a curious expression. "Hello again," she said solemnly. James crouched down to her level, surprised at how natural the gesture felt. "Hello, Audrey. Do you remember my name?" She scrunched her face in concentration. "Mr. Montgomery?" "James," he corrected gently. "You can call me James." Lauren approached more cautiously, nodding a greeting. "She's been asking about you," she said quietly. "I brought something," James said to Audrey, revealing the book. "Your mom told me you like stories." Audrey's eyes widened as she accepted the gift with reverent hands. "Is it about adventures?" "The biggest kind," James confirmed, watching as she traced the colorful cover with small fingers. "Can you read it to me?" she asked, already flipping through the pages. James glanced at Lauren, who nodded permission. "There's a playground over there," she suggested, pointing to a nearby clearing with swings and a small slide. As they walked, Audrey slipped her hand into James's without hesitation. The simple gesture, those tiny fingers wrapping around his, caught him off guard. In boardrooms, he commanded attention without effort. Here, this small hand in his left, him speechless. They settled on a bench while Audrey explored the playground, the book temporarily forgotten in favor of the slide. James watched her, searching for pieces of himself in her movements, her expressions. "She has your eyes," Lauren said, breaking the silence, "and your stubbornness." James smiled despite himself. "Poor kid." "She's anything but poor," Lauren replied. "She's loved. She's happy." The unspoken accusation hung between them. "She didn't need you to be those things." "Why now, Lauren?" James asked, keeping his voice low. "After 4 years, why didn't you just keep going?" Lauren watched Audrey climb the ladder to the slide again. "Because she started asking questions about her father, about where she came from." She sighed. "And because keeping her from you wasn't right no matter what your uncle said." James nodded, accepting her answer even if it didn't erase the lost years. "Daddy," Audrey called from the top of the slide, freezing them both. "Watch me." The word struck James like lightning. Daddy. She didn't even know yet, not really, but somehow she'd chosen that word, that moment. "I'm watching," he called back, his voice rougher than intended. As Audrey slid down with a squeal of delight, James felt something crack within him, the careful wall he'd built around his emotions beginning to crumble. "How do we do this?" he asked Lauren quietly. "One day at a time," she answered, watching as Audrey ran toward them, face flushed with excitement. "That's all any parent can do." "And this is where I color," Audrey explained, gesturing proudly to a small table in the corner of her classroom. "Ms. Patricia says I'm the best at staying in the lines." James nodded seriously, absorbing every detail of his daughter's preschool classroom. He had rescheduled a crucial investor meeting to attend the school's parent day, something that would have been unthinkable just 2 weeks ago. "And who's this?" he asked, pointing to a crayon drawing pinned to the wall. "That's my family," Audrey explained matter-of-factly. "That's Mommy, that's me, and that's you." She pointed to a tall stick figure drawn slightly apart from the others. "You were far away, but now you're back." James swallowed hard, unable to respond. How did children do that? Cut through complications with such simple clarity? "Mr. Montgomery?" The teacher approached with a warm smile. "I'm Patricia Wells. It's wonderful to finally meet Audrey's father." "James, please," he said, shaking her hand. "I'm sorry I've been absent until now." Her eyes held no judgment. "Children are remarkably adaptable. Audrey's been telling everyone. Her daddy came back from important business." Across the room, Audrey was excitedly showing her mother a clay sculpture she'd made. Lauren caught his eye and gave a small nod, acknowledgement of this strange new reality they were building together. Later that evening, James's town car pulled up outside Lauren's modest apartment building. He'd promised Audrey he would come for dinner after handling some important business, a confrontation with his uncle that had left him seething. "She didn't need to be burdened with your responsibilities," Richard had insisted, unrepentant. "The company was at a critical juncture. I made the decision that was best for everyone." "For everyone except me and my daughter," James had countered, his voice controlled despite his rage. The conversation had ended with his uncle's warning. "Family complications have destroyed more fortunes than bad investments ever did." Now, as Lauren opened the door to let him in, James pushed those thoughts aside. This apartment, with its modest furnishings and walls covered in Audrey's artwork, was more important than his uncle's manipulations. "Daddy!" Audrey ran to him, still novelty excited about her newly discovered father. "We're having spaghetti. Did you know it's my favorite?" "I didn't," James admitted, realizing how many simple facts about his daughter remained unknown to him. "But I'm learning." Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Audrey dominated the conversation, filling every silence with stories about her friends, her toys, and the butterfly she'd seen at the park. James found himself laughing more genuinely than he had in years. As Lauren cleared the plates, Audrey tugged James toward a shelf of DVDs. "Can we watch Moana? It's the best movie ever." "Sure," he agreed, having no idea what Moana was but eager to share whatever his daughter enjoyed. Halfway through the movie, Audrey's commentary grew quieter until she finally dozed off against James's side, her small body warm and trusting, He sat perfectly still, afraid to disturb her, mesmerized by the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Lauren returned from the kitchen and smiled at the sight. "She's never usually this comfortable with new people," she said softly. "I'm not just new people," James replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm her father." Lauren studied him for a long moment. "Yes, you are." She hesitated. "This isn't going to be easy, you know. Your life and ours are very different." James looked down at Audrey, peaceful in sleep. "Then my life will have to change," he said simply. And for the first time, the prospect of reorganizing his carefully structured existence didn't seem like a sacrifice at all. "And this is where I work," James said, guiding Audrey into his corner office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Her eyes widened as she took in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sleek furniture, and the imposing desk that dominated the space. "It's bigger than our whole apartment," she whispered, her hand still firmly clasped in his. James had arranged to bring Audrey to Montgomery Industries while Lauren attended a job interview. He'd been eager to show his daughter this part of his life, but now, seeing it through her eyes, the glass and steel suddenly seemed cold and impersonal. "Do you want to sit in my chair?" he offered. Audrey nodded enthusiastically, climbing onto his executive chair and spinning herself in circles, her laughter echoing against the minimalist walls. The sound felt out of place here, and yet perfectly right. "Mr. Montgomery, the Tokyo call is in 5 minutes, his assistant said, appearing at the doorway before noticing Audrey. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "It's fine, Sarah, this is my daughter, Audrey." The words still felt new on his tongue, but he spoke them with unmistakable pride. "Can you reschedule Tokyo? We're having an important meeting of our own today." Sarah's surprise was momentary but professional. "Of course, sir." As she left, James caught a glimpse of curious eyes peering from cubicles outside. News traveled fast, and the mysterious child accompanying the notoriously private CEO would fuel speculation for weeks. "Is this where you were when you couldn't be with us?" Audrey asked innocently, still spinning slowly in his chair. The question hit James with unexpected force. "Yes," he admitted. "I was here a lot." Audrey stopped spinning, her expression thoughtful. "It's a nice place, but it's not very fun." James laughed softly. "No, I suppose it isn't." "Don't you get lonely?" she asked, looking around the immaculate office where nothing personal existed. No photos, no mementos, nothing that wasn't business-related. "I never thought about it before," he answered honestly. His phone buzzed. Richard's name flashed on the screen, but James silenced it without answering. His uncle could wait. Later, as they shared ice cream in the park near Lauren's apartment, Audrey chattering about the spinny chair and the giant windows in Daddy's office, James found himself studying Lauren. She looked tired but happy, her interview apparently successful. "Marketing coordinator position," she explained when Audrey ran ahead to the swings. "Not exactly what I was doing before, Audrey, but it's a good opportunity." "You shouldn't have had to put your career on hold," James said quietly. Lauren shrugged. "Single motherhood comes with sacrifices." The word struck him. Sacrifices. What sacrifices had he made? His life had continued uninterrupted while Lauren's had been completely transformed. "I want to help," he said. "Financially, I mean. It's my responsibility, too." Lauren's expression closed slightly. "We've been managing fine." "That's not the point," James insisted. "She's my daughter, too." Lauren studied him for a moment. "This isn't about money, James. It's about consistency, about being there, not just when it's convenient." The implication stung, but he couldn't deny its truth. His schedule, his lifestyle, none of it was designed for fatherhood. "I'm learning," he said finally. Lauren's expression softened. "I know you are." As they watched Audrey on the swings, her hair flying behind her as she pumped her legs higher, James felt a peculiar sensation, a glimpse of a different life he might have had. One with breakfast routines and bedtime stories, school pickups, and weekend pancakes. A life that had continued without him, leaving a void he hadn't even known existed. "Higher, Daddy, look how high," Audrey called, and for a moment, that other life didn't feel lost at all, just delayed in finding him. "Daddy?" The small voice on the phone sounded congested and miserable. "I don't feel good." James was in the middle of preparing notes for a board meeting when Lauren had called, explaining that Audrey had a fever and had been asking for him. "I'm sorry to bother you," Lauren said, taking the phone back. "She's been insistent." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, James replied without hesitation. An hour later, James sat on the edge of Audrey's small bed, gently placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Her cheeks were flushed with fever, her usually bright eyes glassy and tired. "The medicine should start working soon," Lauren said from the doorway, her own exhaustion evident. She'd been up most of the night with Audrey. "You should rest," James told her. "I can stay with her." Lauren hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "Call me if her fever goes up." Alone with his sick daughter, James felt a helplessness he'd never experienced. In business, there, problems had solutions, negotiations had strategies. Here he could only watch as Audrey shifted uncomfortably, occasionally whimpering in her half-sleep. "Daddy?" she murmured, her small hand reaching out to find his. "Will you tell me a story?" "Of course," he said softly, though he realized he didn't know any children's stories by heart. Instead, he began telling her about the compass necklace she treasured. "It belonged to my mother," he explained, stroking her hair gently. "She gave it to me when I was just a little older than you. She said it would always help me find my way home." Audrey's fever-bright eyes watched him intently. "Was she nice?" "Your mommy?" James smiled sadly. "Very nice. She would have loved you so much." "Where is she now?" "She died when I was 12. James said softly. "But I think she's still watching over us sometimes." Audrey seemed to consider this. "Is that why you gave the necklace to my mommy? So she could find her way?" The innocent question caught James off guard. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Something like that." He remembered giving Lauren the necklace on their last night together before a business trip to Shanghai. The trip that had stretched into months of global deal-making, during which she had disappeared from his life. Had she already known she was pregnant? Had she already decided to leave? Audrey drifted back to sleep, her small fingers still wrapped around his. James sat in the dim room, studying her features, his eyes, Lauren's nose, a perfect blend of them both. Near dawn, Lauren appeared in the doorway. "You stayed all night," she whispered, surprised. James nodded, careful not to disturb Audrey. "I couldn't leave her." They moved to the kitchen where Lauren made coffee. The early morning light cast a gentle glow over the small space, creating an unexpected intimacy as they spoke in hushed tones. "I never asked," James said, accepting the mug she offered. "Why did you keep the necklace?" Lauren's fingers traced the rim of her own cup. "I meant to return it, but then it became Audrey's connection to you. Something of yours she could have." A comfortable silence settled between them, perhaps the first since their reunion. "You're good with her," Lauren finally said. "Better than I expected." James smiled wryly. "Better than I expected, too." "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice barely audible, "for keeping her from you. I convinced myself it was the right thing." Her eyes met his, and for a moment James glimpsed the young woman he'd known before. Determined but vulnerable, principled yet uncertain. "We can't change what happened," he said finally. "But we're here now." When Audrey woke later, her fever broken, she found both parents asleep in the living room. Her mother curled on the sofa, her father in an armchair nearby. For the first time in her young life, her entire world existed in the same small space. "You've been distracted for weeks." Richard Montgomery's voice cut through the private dining room of the exclusive club where Montgomery board members often gathered. "The Tokyo deal is stalling, and that consortium in Dubai is getting impatient." James looked up from his barely touched lunch. "Everything is under control." "Is it?" Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. Or is it that woman and her child? A chill settled over James. Her name is Lauren, and Audrey is my daughter. So you say, Richard replied, his silver eyebrows lifting slightly. Rather convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Just as we're finalizing the Asian expansion, a child appears from nowhere. James set down his fork carefully. She didn't appear from nowhere. You made sure of that. Richard didn't flinch at the accusation. I made a judgment call to protect what 3 generations of Montgomerys built. You were barely 30, working 80-hour weeks. A baby would have derailed everything. That wasn't your decision to make. Someone had to think about the bigger picture. Richard's voice hardened. Have you considered that perhaps she's using the child to get to your fortune? The timing is suspicious. James stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Later that evening, as James drove to Lauren's apartment for their now regular Friday dinner with Audrey, his uncle's insinuations festered in his mind. He knew they were manipulation tactics. Richard excelled at those. But they played into doubts he hadn't fully acknowledged. Why had Lauren reappeared now? After keeping Audrey hidden for 4 years, what changed? The questions lingered as he watched Lauren prepare dinner, Audrey helping by arranging napkins on the table. Lauren had refused his offers of financial support beyond a college fund for Audrey. She'd maintained boundaries, never asking for anything. Yet doubt, once planted, grew like a weed. You're quiet tonight, Lauren observed after Audrey went to bed. I saw my uncle today, James said, studying her reaction. Lauren stiffened slightly. I see. He seems to think your reappearance is strategically timed. Her eyes flashed with hurt, quickly replaced by anger. Do you believe that? I don't know what to believe, James admitted. 4 years is a long time, Lauren. Why decide to find me now? Lauren crossed her arms. I already told you Audrey was asking questions. She deserved to know you. And there's nothing else? No other reason? Her voice became dangerously quiet. What exactly are you suggesting? Montgomery Industries is about to complete its largest expansion yet. The timing is notable. Lauren stared at him in disbelief. You think I orchestrated some master plan to what, claim a piece of your empire? Is that really who you think I am? I don't know, James replied honestly. 4 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you capable of keeping my child from me either. The words hung between them like shattered glass. Get out, Lauren said quietly. Lauren, no. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. I've made many mistakes, but I never used Audrey as leverage for anything. That you could even think that. James reached for her arm, but she stepped back. Daddy? Audrey's small voice came from the hallway. She stood in her pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with concern. Why are you and Mommy fighting? The sight of his daughter, innocent and confused, made James's accusations seem suddenly petty and cruel. The fear in her eyes reflected something he recognized from his own childhood. The dread of watching adults you love turn against each other. We're not fighting, sweetheart, Lauren said, her voice softening instantly. Daddy and I just had a disagreement. Audrey looked unconvinced, her small brow furrowed. Are you going away again? The question struck James like a physical blow. In her mind, arguments meant abandonment, exactly what he had inadvertently done before she was born. No, he said firmly, kneeling to her level. I'm not going anywhere. James arrived at Audrey's preschool 15 minutes early, parking his Bentley discreetly down the street. Since their argument 3 nights ago, Lauren had been civil but distant, communicating only about Audrey's schedule. Today was his turn, to pick Audrey up from school and take her to dance class, a new routine he'd committed to despite his packed calendar. His phone rang. Dubai again. 4th call today. He silenced it just as children began spilling from the building. Audrey emerged, spotted his car, and ran toward him with her usual enthusiasm. The tension with Lauren hadn't affected her affection for him, a small mercy he didn't deserve. Daddy, Ms. Patricia said. We need costumes for the recital, she announced, buckling into her car seat. I'm going to be a butterfly. A butterfly? James repeated, momentarily forgetting business pressures. That sounds perfect. As he drove toward Miss Elaine's dance academy, Audrey chattered about sequins and wings and how she would need to practice very hard because butterflies were excellent dancers. James found himself smiling despite everything. And Mommy said, "You're coming to watch me," she finished, her eyes bright with excitement. Wouldn't miss it, he promised, not mentioning the board meeting already scheduled for that day. He'd move mountains if necessary. At the dance studio, James settled awkwardly on a small bench among mothers watching through a viewing window. A few gave him curious glances. The suit-wearing father was clearly out of place, but most were focused on their phones or conversations. "First time?" asked a friendly voice beside him. James turned to find a woman with kind eyes and a practical ponytail. "That obvious," she laughed. "The tie was my first clue. I'm Diane, Zoe's mom." James, Audrey's father. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Ah, you're Audrey's dad. She talks about you all the time." "She does?" "Oh, yes. How you're a very important businessman, but still make time to read her stories." Diane smiled. "It's her favorite thing about you." Something warm spread through James's chest. Through the window, he watched Audrey attempt a clumsy twirl, her face serious with concentration. His phone vibrated again. His assistant this time. He ignored it. After class, as they shared ice cream, Audrey suddenly asked, "Are you and Mommy still mad at each other?" James nearly choked on his cone. "Why do you think we're mad?" "You were using your angry voices," she said matter-of-factly, "and now Mommy looks sad when I talk about you." Her perception startled him. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree, but that doesn't mean we're really mad." Audrey looked skeptical. Tommy's parents disagreed, and now his daddy lives in a different house. Implication was clear, even from a 4-year-old. James set down his ice cream. "Audrey, listen to me," he said gently. "Your mom and I might disagree sometimes, but we both love you very much. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" Her blue eyes, his eyes, searched his face. "I promise." When they arrived at Lauren's apartment, she was waiting with news. Audrey's. "School is closing," she said after their daughter went to her room. "Financial problems. We have 2 weeks to find somewhere new." James frowned. "That's impossible mid-year." "I know. The good preschools have waiting lists a mile long." Lauren looked exhausted. "I've been calling everywhere." "Without thinking," James offered, "I could help. I might know people who—" "We don't need your connections," Lauren interrupted, then softened. "But thank you." James hesitated, then said, "About the other night. I was wrong to question your motives. I'm sorry." Lauren studied him for a long moment. "Richard got in your head?" "Yes," he admitted. "But I chose to listen." Their conversation was interrupted by Audrey's excited voice. "Mommy, Daddy, come see my butterfly dance." They exchanged a look, a brief truce for their daughter's sake. As they watched Audrey demonstrate her twirls in the living room, James realized something important. The crisis wasn't really about the school closing. It was about whether he and Lauren could put aside their past and their pride to truly co-parent together. Montgomery Industries stock fell 3 points this morning, James's CFO reported grimly, sliding the financial statements across the conference table. Market analysts are questioning the Dubai deal delay. James reviewed the numbers, acutely aware of the 12 expectant faces around the table. For 20 days straight, he'd been juggling his expanding role in Audrey's life with his responsibilities to the company. Something had to give. "The Tokyo investors are threatening to pull out," Richard added from the other end of the table, his tone making it clear whom he blamed. "Perhaps now would be a good time to refocus on what matters." James met his uncle's eyes, recognizing the challenge. "Everything has my full attention." But it didn't. Not really. After the meeting, James retreated to his office, staring at the growing stack of documents requiring his review. His phone chimed with a text from Lauren. "Found a preschool with an opening. Tour tomorrow at 11? He glanced at his calendar. Investor meeting at 10, board presentation at 1. There was no window. "Need to reschedule," he replied. Corporate crisis. Lauren's response was swift. Audrey was counting on you being there. The familiar pressure built in his chest, the same tension he'd felt throughout his career when competing obligations demanded his attention. Except now, the stakes felt different. Higher. His intercom buzzed. Sir, Dubai is on line 1. They're insisting on speaking with you directly. James took a deep breath and picked up the phone. Old patterns were easy to fall back into. The certainty of business, the clear metrics of success, the familiar rhythm of negotiation. For the next 6 hours, he was fully the CEO again, expertly navigating the corporate waters that had defined his life for so long. By evening, the crisis had been averted. The Dubai partners were appeased, the Tokyo investors reassured. Montgomery stock had already begun recovering in after-hours trading. Richard had even offered a rare acknowledgement. That's why you're in charge. It was nearly 9 when James finally left the office, the satisfaction of corporate victory fading as he drove toward Lauren's apartment. He'd promised Audrey he'd read her bedtime story tonight. The lights were already off when he arrived. Lauren met him at the door, her expression neutral. She waited up as long as she could, she said quietly. James checked his watch, wincing. I'm sorry, there was an emergency with the Dubai deal, I know. Lauren crossed her arms. She drew you a picture of the new school she wants you to see. James followed Lauren to the kitchen where a crayon drawing waited on the table. A colorful building with stick figures labeled me, Mommy, and Daddy. She's convinced you'll love it, Lauren said, watching his face. The guilt was immediate and sharp. I'll make it up to her. Lauren sighed. This is exactly what I was afraid of, James. That she'd get attached, and then your real life would take priority. This isn't about priority, he protested. Some things can't be rescheduled. And some things shouldn't be, Lauren countered. She's 4 years old. She doesn't understand corporate emergencies. She just knows her father wasn't there when he said he would be. The words stung because they carried truth. In the corporate crisis, he'd slipped effortlessly back into his old self, the James Montgomery who answered to shareholders and board members, who measured success in stock prices and acquisitions. What do you want from me, Lauren? He asked tiredly. To abandon my responsibilities? The company employs thousands of people. I want you to recognize that you have responsibilities to Audrey too, she said. Consistent, reliable responsibilities that don't get bumped when something more important comes up. James ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. I'm trying. I know, Lauren said, her voice softening slightly. But trying isn't always enough for a child. As he left the apartment, the drawing folded carefully in his pocket, James felt pulled between two worlds, the familiar controlled environment of Montgomery Industries and the messy, unpredictable reality of fatherhood. Both demanded his full commitment. Both seemed impossible to relinquish. James watched raindrops race down the windows of his penthouse. The city lights blurred beneath the storm. 3 days had passed since he'd missed Audrey's bedtime, and the distance between him and Lauren seemed to be growing again. She'd been polite but reserved when he'd picked up Audrey for their weekend together, their conversation limited to logistics. Now Audrey was asleep in his guest room, which he'd hurriedly transformed into a child's space with pastel bedding and a nightlight, while he stood alone with a glass of scotch and mounting restlessness. He set down his untouched drink and pulled out his phone. Can we talk? He texted Lauren. When no immediate response came, he added, It's important. Several minutes later, his phone rang. Is Audrey okay? Lauren asked immediately. She's fine. Asleep. James took a breath. This is about us. There is no us, James. There's a us when it comes to raising our daughter, he countered, and right now we're not doing a great job of it. Silence stretched between them before Lauren sighed. What do you want to talk about? Not over the phone, James said. Can I come by tomorrow after I drop Audrey at the new preschool? Another pause. All right. The following morning, after watching Audrey confidently march into her new classroom, James drove to Lauren's apartment. She opened the door in casual clothes. her hair pulled back, looking both wary and curious. "Coffee?" she offered, leading him into the kitchen. James accepted the mug she handed him, then set it down untouched. "I'm not good at this," he admitted abruptly. Lauren raised an eyebrow. "At drinking coffee?" Despite himself, James smiled. "At fatherhood, at balancing, everything." Lauren leaned against the counter, studying him. "Most parents struggle with balance, James. The difference is, they don't have the option to retreat to a penthouse and billion-dollar company when it gets hard." The observation wasn't cruel, just factual. James nodded. "I know I'm failing her, and I don't know how to fix it." Something in his voice, the rare vulnerability, seemed to soften Lauren's defense. She gestured toward the living room where they sat on opposite ends of the couch. "My father walked out when I was 8, James said quietly. "He chose the company over his family. I swore I'd never do that to my own children." He met Lauren's eyes. "And then, I didn't even know my daughter existed for 4 years." "That wasn't your choice," Lauren said softly. "No, but my choices now are my responsibility." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I'm afraid of disappointing her, Lauren, of becoming exactly what I resented in my own father." Lauren was silent for a long moment. "I was afraid too," she finally said. "Afraid you'd see Audrey as an obligation, a distraction. Afraid you'd drift in and out of her life, leaving her with expectations you'd never fulfill." "Is that why you stayed away?" She nodded slowly. "Partly, and partly because I didn't want to need you." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I'd convinced myself we were fine on our own." "Are you?" James asked. "Fine on your own?" Lauren met his gaze directly. "We managed. But Audrey deserves to know her father, to be loved by both her parents." The honesty between them felt fragile but necessary, like the first clean breath after years in a smoky room. "I need to change," James said. "My schedule, my priorities, maybe even step back from some of my responsibilities at Montgomery." Lauren looked surprised. "You'd do that? For Audrey?" James didn't hesitate. "Yes." A small smile tugged at Lauren's lips. "You really do love her." "More than I thought possible," he admitted. "She's everything I never knew I wanted." The unspoken question hung between them. What about us? But neither was ready to voice it. The headline splashed across the business section made James's stomach drop. "Montgomery heir's secret love child raises questions about company future." Accompanying the article was a grainy photo of him and Audrey at the park, her face mercifully blurred but recognizable to anyone who knew her. His phone had been ringing non-stop since dawn. Board members, shareholders, PR team, all demanding explanations. But his first call had been to Lauren, warning her before she could be blindsided. "Stay home today," he'd told her. "There might be photographers." Now, as he stormed into Richard's office without knocking, his uncle looked up with practiced innocence. "This has your fingerprints all over it," James said, slapping the newspaper on the desk. Richard leaned back in his chair. "The press finds what it wants. I merely suggested they look more closely at your recent distractions." "You've crossed a line," James said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Audrey is a child, my child. She's not a pawn in whatever game you're playing." Richard's expression hardened. "This company is my life's work, James. I won't watch you jeopardize it for some woman who conveniently appears with a child after you've built an empire." "Lauren has never asked for a penny?" "Not yet." Richard stood, matching James's intensity. "But have you considered that perhaps she isn't who she seems? That perhaps paternity should be verified before you throw away everything we've built?" The suggestion landed like a slap. "I don't need a test to know Audrey is mine. The board might disagree," Richard replied smoothly. "In fact, I've taken the liberty of arranging a discreet DNA analysis. For the company's protection, of course." James felt cold fury rising. "You had no right." "I have every right as a major shareholder and board member." Richard handed him an envelope. The results arrived this morning. Perhaps you should see for yourself. With stiff fingers, James opened the envelope. The document inside was official-looking, complete with a laboratory letterhead and technical jargon. His eyes fixed on the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Impossible, he whispered. I thought you might say that, Richard replied. Which is why I had it done twice. James stared at the paper, mind racing. Audrey had his eyes, his expressions. The connection between them had been immediate, undeniable. This couldn't be right. I'll have my own test done, he said, his voice hollow. Of course. Richard's tone was sympathetic but triumphant. In the meantime, perhaps reconsider how much of yourself you invest in this situation. By afternoon, the story had exploded. Lauren called, her voice tight with controlled panic. There are reporters outside my building, she said. And Audrey's school called. Someone was asking questions about her. James gripped the phone. I'll send security. Pack enough for a few days. I'll move you both somewhere safe until this blows over. James. Lauren hesitated. There's something else. The preschool director mentioned a DNA test, that someone claimed to have proof you're not Audrey's father. James closed his eyes. Richard. Is it true? About the test? He had one done without my knowledge or consent, James confirmed. The results are wrong, Lauren. Her silence spoke volumes. You can't possibly believe it, he said. Of course not, she replied quickly. But your uncle clearly wants me out of your life. And I'm starting to think maybe he's right. Audrey and I were doing fine before. Maybe we should just go back to that. Running away isn't the answer, James insisted. Neither is exposing our daughter to this circus, Lauren countered. I have a job offer in Boston. I was going to tell you, but Boston? James felt the ground shifting beneath him. That's not happening, Lauren. I won't lose her again. I don't think that's your decision anymore, she said quietly before hanging up. The Montgomery Industries boardroom had never felt so hostile. James stood at the head of the table, surrounded by concerned faces as Richard presented his case. The pattern is clear, Richard concluded, gesturing to the financial reports. Since this personal situation began, our CEO's focus has wavered. The stock is down, the Dubai deal is delayed, and now we face a potential PR crisis. Murmurs rippled through the room. James surveyed the faces of people he'd worked alongside for years, people who now looked at him with doubt. If I may, James said, his voice steady despite his rage. Montgomery Industries has weathered fluctuations before, but this isn't about stock prices. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder. This is about deception. My uncle arranged fraudulent DNA testing to suggest I'm not Audrey Clark's father. The boardroom fell silent. That's a serious accusation, one director said carefully. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. James distributed copies of documents, the laboratory's confirmation that the sample had been contaminated, along with evidence of Richard's communication with the lab. Richard's face reddened. This is absurd. I was protecting the company. You were protecting yourself, James interrupted. Your position, your control. I built this company alongside your father, and that gives you the right to interfere in my life, to fabricate evidence, to expose a 4-year-old child to media scrutiny? James's controlled facade finally cracked. You kept my daughter from me for 4 years. You convinced Lauren I wouldn't want her or our child. And when they finally found their way back to me, you tried to destroy that too. The board members shifted uncomfortably, witnessing a family dispute they hadn't anticipated. I move for an immediate vote, Richard said, his voice tight, on whether James Montgomery should temporarily step aside while he addresses his personal matters. James looked around the table, at the empire that had been his singular focus for so long. That won't be necessary, he said quietly. I'm taking a leave of absence, effective immediately. Ignoring the stunned reactions, he walked out, already dialing Lauren's number. No answer. His driver took him straight to her apartment, but no one was home. Finally, a text came through. Meeting at Riverside Park, 4 p.m. At the park, he found Lauren sitting on a bench watching Audrey play on the swings. Her expression was resolved in a way that made his heart sink. "The Boston job is a good opportunity," she said without preamble. "Senior marketing position. Better schools for Audrey." "Lauren, please." "I've already accepted it," she continued. "We leave next week." James felt as if the ground had vanished beneath him. "You can't take her away from me, not now, not after everything." "Everything?" Lauren's voice rose slightly. "You mean the media circus? The photographers following us? Your uncle's attempts to discredit me as some kind of gold digger? That everything?" I confronted Richard. "I stepped away from the company. I'm trying to fix this." "Some things can't be fixed, James." Lauren stood, pacing. "This is exactly why I kept Audrey away. Your world is too complicated, too public. She deserves a normal childhood." "With only half her family?" James challenged. "I am her father, Lauren. DNA test or not, you know it. She knows it." "Daddy," Audrey called, running toward them. "Watch me swing." "In a minute, sweetheart," Lauren called back. To James, she lowered her voice. "I'm doing what's best for her." "No," James said firmly. "You're doing what's easiest for you." The accusation hung between them as Audrey approached, her face falling as she sensed the tension. "Are you fighting again?" she asked softly. Before either could answer, she turned and ran toward the playground. "Audrey," Lauren called, alarmed, but their daughter had disappeared into the crowded park. "Audrey!" James shouted, pushing through the crowd at the playground. Panic rose in his chest as he scanned the sea of unfamiliar faces. "Audrey!" Lauren ran in the opposite direction, her voice frantic as she called their daughter's name. Parents turned to stare, some pulling their own children closer as if danger had suddenly appeared in their midst. 30 terrifying minutes passed as they searched, park security joining the effort. James's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more horrifying than the last. Had someone recognized her from the news stories? Had she wandered into the street, to the water? When a security guard's radio crackled with news, James and Lauren both froze. "We found her," the guard said, relief evident in his voice. "Northeast corner by the old oak tree. Crying, but safe." They ran, reaching Audrey simultaneously. She sat huddled against the massive tree trunk, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching her compass necklace. When she saw them, she didn't run to either parent but remained where she was, small shoulders shaking with sobs. James felt his heart fracture at the sight. He and Lauren approached slowly, kneeling on either side of her. "We were so worried," Lauren whispered, reaching to brush Audrey's hair from her tear-stained face. "Why did you run away, sweetheart?" James asked gently. Audrey looked between them, her blue eyes swimming with tears. "Because you're always fighting about me," she said, her voice small but clear. "And now we have to go away, and Daddy can't. Come, and it's all my fault." James and Lauren exchanged a stricken look over their daughter's head. This was the consequence of their conflict, a 4-year-old believing she was responsible for her parents' unhappiness. "None of this is your fault," James said firmly, taking Audrey's small hand in his. "Not one bit of it." "The grown-up problems are our problems," Lauren added, "not yours." But Audrey shook her head, her child's logic cutting straight through. "They're reassurances. If I wasn't here, you wouldn't be fighting." The simple statement laid bare the selfishness of their actions. In their struggle over what was best for Audrey, they had failed to consider what their conflict was doing to her. That night, after Lauren had tucked an exhausted Audrey into bed, she found James sitting on her apartment balcony, staring out at the city lights. "She's finally asleep," she said, closing the door softly behind her. James nodded, not turning around. "We did this to her, Lauren. We made her feel responsible for adult problems no child should have to carry." Lauren sank into the chair beside him. "I know." Silence stretched between them, filled with regret and the weight of decisions that could no longer be unmade. "I can't lose her again," James finally said, his voice hoarse. But I won't put her through more of this either. Lauren studied his profile in the dim light. What are you saying? I'm saying. He hesitated, the words painful to voice. If Boston is truly what's best for her, I won't stand in your way. I'll figure out how to be her father from a distance. The admission cost him dearly. Lauren could see it in the tight set of his jaw, the way his hands gripped the chair arms. And if that's not what's best for her? She asked quietly. James finally turned to meet her gaze. Then we need to find a way to stop fighting and start actually parenting. Together. Later, alone in his penthouse, James stared at the ceiling above his bed. The board meeting to formalize his leave of absence was scheduled for tomorrow morning. His career, the legacy he'd spent his life building, now hung in the balance. Richard had already begun positioning himself to take control, yet none of it seemed to matter compared to the memory of Audrey's tear-streaked face. The empire could fall. The name Montgomery could disappear from the business world entirely. If it meant keeping his daughter in his life, keeping her happy and secure, it would be worth it. For the first time, James fully understood what it meant to be a father. Mr. Montgomery, the board is ready for you. James nodded to his assistant, straightening his tie as he prepared to enter the boardroom. This meeting would determine the future of Montgomery Industries, yet his mind was elsewhere, fixated on Audrey's tear-streaked face in the park, on Lauren's job in Boston, on everything that truly mattered. Inside, Richard sat at the head of the table, a position that had been James's until yesterday. The usurpation was symbolic but effective. The other board members watched silently as James took his seat. We're here to formalize the leadership transition, Richard began smoothly, given James's personal situation. Before we begin, James interrupted. I'd like to make a statement. Without waiting for permission, he withdrew a folder from his briefcase and began distributing documents. What is this? Richard demanded. My terms, James replied simply. I'm selling my majority shares in Montgomery Industries to an investment group that doesn't include my uncle. Shocked murmurs filled the room. Richard's face drained of color. You can't do this, he sputtered. The company has been in our family for 3 generations, James finished, and it almost cost me my daughter. Again. He turned to address the entire board. My offer is straightforward. The investment group agrees to maintain current employment levels and honor all existing contracts. Your positions are secure. He glanced at his watch. You have until noon to accept. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have somewhere more important to be. James walked out without looking back, leaving stunned silence in his wake. 30 minutes later, he stood outside Audrey's classroom, watching through the observation window as she carefully colored a picture, her face serious with concentration, so much like him in her focus, yet with Lauren's gentleness. You came. Lauren's voice beside him was quiet, surprised. I said I would. He turned to face her. The Boston job. Have you given them your final answer? Lauren studied him. Not yet. Don't take it, James said simply. James, I'm not asking you to stay for me, he clarified. I'm asking you to consider what's best for Audrey, and I don't think separating her from either parent is the answer. Lauren sighed. And your company? Your uncle made it very clear. You're either a CEO or a father. Not both. I chose, James replied. I'm selling my shares. Lauren's eyes widened. Montgomery Industries has been your whole life. No, he corrected gently. It's been my father's life, my uncle's life. I just inherited their priorities. He nodded toward the classroom. I have different ones now. After school, they took Audrey to the carousel in Central Park, neutral ground where they could talk, while she rode painted horses and waved each time she circled past. I've rented a house, James explained, watching Audrey's delighted face as the carousel spun. 10 minutes from your apartment, 2-story with a garden. Room enough for a proper swing set. Lauren raised an eyebrow. A house in Manhattan? I know it's extravagant, he admitted, but I want Audrey to have a second home, not just a place she visits. Lauren was quiet for a long moment. And us? What are we, James? The question hung between them, complicated and important. "We're Audrey's parents," he said carefully. "Beyond that, I think we have a lot to figure out." Lauren nodded, accepting his honest answer. One step at a time. When Audrey's ride ended, she ran to them, breathless with excitement. "Can I go again?" "Please." "One more," Lauren agreed with a smile. As Audrey raced back to claim the same horse, Lauren turned to James. "Your uncle. He won't accept this quietly." "Probably not," James agreed. "But for the first time in my life, I don't care what Richard Montgomery thinks." He didn't add what else had changed, that watching Audrey's unbridled joy was worth more than any business empire could ever be. 6 months later, James stood in the backyard of his brownstone, surveying his handiwork with a critical eye. The treehouse wasn't perfect, the railing slightly crooked, one window frame not quite square, but he'd built it himself, refusing the contractors Lauren had suggested. "It has character," he muttered, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Daddy, is it ready?" Audrey called, bouncing with excitement as she ran from the house. "Almost," James replied, lifting her to see inside. "What do you think? Good enough for a birthday party?" "It's the best treehouse ever," she declared solemnly, her blue eyes, his eyes, wide with wonder. Later that afternoon, the small backyard, filled with children from Audrey's kindergarten class, their laughter mingling with the spring breeze. James manned the grill while Lauren arranged presents on a picnic table decorated with butterfly streamers. 5 years old, Lauren said, watching Audrey proudly show her friends the treehouse. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it." James nodded, understanding completely. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined this scene, this life he now led. Montgomery Industries continued without him, his name still on the building but his presence no longer required. Instead, he'd established a small foundation focused on educational technology for underserved schools, inspired by watching Audrey learn. "She looks happy," he observed quietly. "She is happy," Lauren confirmed. "We all are." They exchanged a smile, comfortable, genuine, no longer burdened by the past. Their relationship had evolved carefully, focused first on co-parenting, then friendship, and recently something more. They still maintained separate homes, but the boundaries between their lives had softened. The garden gate opened, and James tensed as Richard Montgomery entered, a wrapped gift tucked under his arm. "I wasn't sure you'd come," James said, approaching his uncle. Richard looked older, the month since their corporate showdown etched in new lines around his eyes. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But some things are more important than pride." James studied the man who had shaped so much of his life, for better and worse. The anger that had fueled him for months had gradually faded, replaced by something like pity. "She's over there," James said, nodding toward Audrey. "She's been asking about her great-uncle." Richard's expression softened. "She has? Family matters to her," James replied simply. "Even the complicated parts." As Richard moved hesitantly toward the children, Lauren appeared at James's side. "That was generous of you," she said quietly. James shrugged. "Audrey taught me that." Later, after the party wound down and the last guest departed, Audrey sat between her parents on the porch swing, drowsy from excitement and birthday cake. "Did you have a good birthday, sweetheart?" Lauren asked, stroking her daughter's hair. Audrey nodded sleepily. "The best." She looked up at James. "Uncle Richard said he has a sailboat. Can we go on it sometime?" James exchanged a glance with Lauren. "We'll see," he promised. As twilight settled over the garden, Audrey's breathing deepened into sleep. James carefully lifted her, carrying her inside to her bed. Her compass necklace gleamed in the soft light as he tucked the blanket around her. When he returned to the porch, Lauren had moved to the railing, gazing at the treehouse silhouetted against the darkening sky. "You know," she said as he joined her, "when I pictured my life, I never imagined this." "Disappointed?" he asked, only half joking. Lauren turned to face him, her expression serious. The opposite. She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. Some people spend their whole lives building empires of concrete and glass. You built something better. James looked back at the house where his daughter slept peacefully, at the garden where her laughter had filled the afternoon, at the woman beside him who had brought him back to what truly mattered. Yes, he agreed softly. I finally did.